The original Dragon Quest is one of those landmark games, but it's also a really old one. It dawned on me that a lot of players who might be interested in it might not really have the full familiarity with a game quite this old. At its core, if you understand JRPGs, it shouldn't be a problem, but it's also a bit clunkier than that because it's one of the first ones. And so, I've decided to make this guide. This isn't going to be a walkthrough or anything, and it's not going to post any real spoilers. But it is going to give you a crash course on some of the game mechanics and how to get yourself started in this game when you're first setting out. Unless otherwise noted, every single thing that I'm going to show you in this video is universal for all of the versions of this game that are currently out, except for the HD version, which, as I discussed in the last video, is fundamentally a different game. And since it's going to be a relatively short list, we're going to get the version-exclusive tips out of the gate pretty much immediately. In the NES, Famicom, and MSX versions of Dragon Quest, your stat gains and your initial starting stats are based on your name. The actual algorithm is based on the first 4 characters of your name specifically, and the actual way it hammers together is a little bit complicated, but there's an entire guide on GameFAQs that'll help you. The amount of difference this actually makes throughout the game is very, very minor. There are 4 main stats that this affects: HP, Strength, Agility, and MP. Depending on what your name is, you'll wind up with one of 4 results. 2 of the stats will gain slightly faster, and 2 of the stats will gain slightly slower. So, for example, Jamis, with all caps, will give you higher growth rate in Strength and HP, but lower in Agility and MP. Link, also in all caps, will give you higher HP and MP, but lower Agility and Strength. The difference is incredibly small, and over the course of the game, you'll barely notice it. If you're doing a challenge run, or absolutely have to min-max for some reason, then by all means check it out and optimize, but otherwise don't worry about it. Also, in the NES, Famicom, and MSX versions of Dragon Quest, monsters you encounter may not have full HP. They can spawn missing as much as 25% of their max health, representing previous fights that they've gotten into. This isn't a reduction of their max health, it's just they start with damage already on them. This means that a monster that has a healing spell, such as a Drachma or a Skeleton Scrapper, that gets wounded and casts it can actually go over their starting HP when you first encounter them, because they already had injuries when you ran into them. In the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, and mobile versions of Dragon Quest, there is significantly more treasure to find. Check things like pots, dressers, anywhere where you might suspect there might be something. You'll find things like gold, pieces of armor, stat seeds, and more. One particularly noticeable addition is that you can find an iron shield in the Craggy Cave. Finding this saves you a rather large chunk of change at this point in the game, so that is a very welcome find. And with this, we've gotten the version-specific tips out of the way. Time to get into this proper. When you're first setting off, you'll have your meeting with the king, in which the main plot is explained, and then you'll be given 3 treasure chests. The first of these contains a magic key, a single-use item that unlocks any door. This one is basically there so you understand how doors work in the game. The second item that you get is a torch. This is an item that lights up dark caves. You'll need these when exploring these, because otherwise you can't see a damn thing. The final chest contains 120 gold with which you can buy your initial equipment. Take a moment to savor it while you have it, because it's going to be a while before you see this much money again. Once you've got everything, open the door, talk to all the guards, see what you can learn, and finally make your way out of Tantagel Castle and over to Breckenary. Be extremely careful during the trip from the castle to the town, because when you first leave the castle, you are neither armed nor armored yet. If you do run into enemies during the very short trip, I recommend running away. Once you finally reach town, your first goal is the equipment shop. Now, there are a number of recommended loadouts to start with in Dragon Quest. The official player's guide recommends that you start with either the oaken club and reinforced clothes, or the bamboo pole and leather armor. Either choice will run you 80 gold, which will leave you with 40 with which to buy secondary items. A common method I see veteran players do is grab the oaken club and nothing else, beat enemies up, and then spend the extra 10 gold to get the leather armor at the start of the game. The starting loadout I tend to go for is a combination of the bamboo pole, the reinforced clothes, and the leather shield. This will run you exactly 120 gold, but it will also set you up with higher defense than you'd have otherwise. If you went with the club and clothes combination, or the bamboo pole leather armor combination, your first new purchase should be a dragon scale from the tool shop. While equipped, the Dragon Scale increases your defense by 2. Because it's an accessory, it stacks with absolutely everything, and at this stage in the game, that little bit of extra defense goes a long way. With our weapons and armor acquired, it's time to begin the single most important part of Dragon Quest I, the grind. The grind in Dragon Quest I is one of the most important elements of the game, which is ironic because it's not a particularly unpleasant part of the game. Your singular goal at the moment is to get stronger, and to do that, you're going to have to contend with the local enemy population. The enemies around Tantagel Castle are fittingly very weak, but so are you at this point in the game. It is critical that at least at first, you don't wander too far away from the castle. Even running into an enemy that's slightly above your pay grade at this point can be a lethal encounter. At level 1, focus your attention on slimes and red slimes. They're not too hard to bring down, and while the amount they bring in is very low, it only takes a few of them to get you to your next level. If you get too low on HP, boomerang back to town and use the inn. Keep at this until inevitably you reach level 3. Idly, if you're curious, dying will cost you half of your gold and respawn you at the castle. Getting to level 3 is arguably when the game really begins. At level 3, you get your first shot of MP, and you also get your first spell, Heal. Most notably, the Heal spell gives you the chance to restore your HP in the field. This makes it much easier for you to survive a situation that goes against you. The Heal spell also effectively unlocks your ability to fully restore your HP without paying anything for it. Directly to the right of Tantagel Castle's entrance is an old man running a shrine. If you talk to him, he will fully restore your MP, for no cost. Because you now have the heal spell, use your magic to heal yourself, talk to him, and recover your MP. It's wonderful. At level 3, you should be able to take on anything up to and including a ghost or magician without too much trouble. The latter is still kind of dangerous because it can cast Sizz, but you do have heal, so that's less of a problem. Once you're level 3, fully patch yourself up and prepare for your first adventure into a cave. Erdrick's Hollow is the tutorial dungeon of the game. It's there to force you to get a hand at dungeoneering while at the same time doing so in a safe, controlled environment. There are no enemy encounters down here. However, you will need a torch to navigate this area, and this is pretty much a crash course in what to expect from a dungeon. The only item to find down here is the tablet, which gives you a plot dump and is your main objective for this dungeon. Now, right out the gate, dungeons are dark. Without a torch, you're not getting anywhere in them. The torch will light up one tile around you in every direction. The torch will last the entire dungeon, and it won't wear off, so don't worry about that. However, once you leave, for any reason, the torch will have been used up. Much later on, you'll get access to the glow spell, which will light up a substantial area around your character, but unlike the torch, this gradually wears out over time. You get that spell at level 9. The question will then become, do you want to cast the spell for more visibility at the cost of having to recast it, or the torch, which will last the entire dungeon and not cost anything except 8 gold. Erdrick's Hollow itself is north and slightly west from Tantagel Castle. It's pretty visible, the entrance being in the middle of a desert over there. Once we've completed this little excursion, it's time for the next step. With our excursion to Erdrick's Hollow out of the way, we now have 3 new tasks on the agenda. First, we're going to want to earn 90 gold to get ourselves the leather shield if we don't already have one. Second, you are going to want to buy the copper sword. This is 180 gold. And finally, we are going to need to get to level 5. The solution to all 3 of these is the exact same. We are now going to be hunting for ghosts and magicians. No more slime hunting. Magicians, also known as prestidigitators, are the best source of gold at this point. Each encounter that you win against one will give you 9 or 10 gold, as well as 4 experience. Actively start hunting for these clowns and you'll be leveling up pretty effectively in no time. To find the area where they spawn the most, you're going to have to head to the north and then to the east. You'll see a bridge that you can cross it. Wander around this area and get into fights. Take out everything that you encounter and earn that money. If your MP gets too low, return to Tantagel Castle, patch yourself up, fully recharge yourself, and come on back. You'll notice another bridge to the southeast. Don't cross that one yet. The monsters there are even stronger, and you're not quite up to snuff yet. Keep it up, and eventually you'll get to level 4. At level 4, you will gain the Sizz spell. Sizz does magical damage, and it will deal a fairly hefty amount of it for this early in the game. With this, encounters with prestidigitators will get much easier. Keep this up, and eventually you'll get yourself to level 5, and you'll have enough gold to buy yourself the copper sword. You're then ready for the next goal. With the copper sword in hand, it's time to move on to the next major objective of this run, which is getting to level 7. However, there are 2 secondary objectives as part of this. Your next goal is saving up at least 300 and as much as 860 in order to buy the next 2 pieces of equipment. These 2 items are the chainmail, which is 300 gold and can be bought at Gallenholm, and the iron axe, which is 560 and can be bought at Cole. Because we're going to have to go pretty far afield, it's time for us to familiarize ourselves with the local area. Gallenholm is pretty easy. Just head north from Tantagel Castle until you hit the shore, and then head west. You can't miss it. The enemies you run into around Gallenholm are more or less around the same strength as the ones that you were farming earlier. For Cole, you want to cross that bridge to the east of where you were grinding earlier, and this time make your way to the northeast. However, with this crossing, you are going to be facing tougher monsters here. The first 2 new enemies to be aware of are the Scorpion and Dracolite. The Scorpion is a very bog-standard physical attacker, but it's stronger than anything you've seen so far. It has relatively high defense for when first encountered, so you should lead off by using your Sizz spell to wear it down. They have a max HP of about 20, so if you're lucky, you'll take them down in about 2 casts. Dracolites, meanwhile, are basically if you combine a Draki and a Prestidigitator. They have 15 HP max, so they're slightly tougher, and they use the same strategy. Again, Sizz will help you take them down pretty quickly. With this, if you've been following the guide, you've actually run into basically every monster that exists in Northern Nilfgaard. Except for one. One that you have to be careful of. The skeleton. The skeleton is your first taste of monsters of a slightly higher tier than the ones you've been running into so far. At level 5, running into one is nasty, but not necessarily a death sentence. They can be pretty nasty. They have 30 HP and they hit pretty hard. If you see one, consider very carefully whether you're up to fight it. At lower levels, you're likely to burn a lot of MP dealing with it. But they are worth fighting. They drop about 11 experience and 30 gold each time you deal with one. Every level will make these things a little bit easier to handle until eventually you hit level 7. That is the main goal. Level 7 gives you access to the Sleep spell, which skeletons are vulnerable to and undercuts the threat they pose significantly. If you're feeling bold, one strategy that works quite well is grinding around Cole itself. The inn in Cole is significantly more expensive than the one in Breckenary, but you can easily grind around here to earn up the cash you need for it, while at the same time building up cash flow and getting the equipment you need. Build yourself up to level 7, get yourself the chainmail, and then acquire the following. 1. A torch. You're gonna need it. 2. At least 3 herbs, just in case. Optionally, get enough to get yourself the iron axe. I only really recommend you do this if you're going to be playing the NES, Famicom, or MSX originals. In all the versions past the Super Famicom release, you don't need to. The weapons scale a little better. Once you've got your herbs, torch, and chainmail, and possibly also the iron axe if you've been willing to grind for that, we are going to be making our way to the first real dungeon of the game. With all your goodies in tow, head back to Tantagel Castle, save if you haven't already, and make your way to Gallenholm. From there, we're headed south. Go southward far enough and you'll eventually see a very large swamp surrounded by mountains. Don't go through the swamp, you'll take damage with every step, and instead circle around either the north or south side and make your way to the east, and you'll eventually find a cave. If you see a large open field followed by a second bridge, you have gone way too far south and are now in mortal danger. Turn around and walk back. Enter the cave, and we can begin the next section. The Craggy Cave is the first major dungeon of the game, as well as the only optional one. Uniquely, it's the only dungeon that is completely different between the NES, MSX, and Famicom versions, and the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, and mobile versions. In both cases, there's a ton of riches and treasure to be had, but there's also very different rules for getting it. As such, I'm going to have to discuss this one from 2 fundamentally different directions. In the NES, MSX, and Famicom versions, this happens to be one of the best spots to grind for cash in the entire game. The reason why is that all of the chests in this cave will respawn when you leave. Among other things you can find here are an herb, a torch, the fighter's ring, a unique accessory that you should put on immediately, and about 120 gold between 2 chests. However, there's more. There's about a 1 in 16 chance that the chest that normally has 100 gold pieces will instead have the death necklace. This is a piece of cursed equipment, and you should not use it. However, finding it is no booby prize because it sells for 1,200 gold. Because the craggy cave itself allows you to pick up an herb and a torch each time you go in, along with the gold, your loops there can effectively become self-sustaining. This makes it an incredible spot, not only for grinding cash, but also grinding XP on enemies that you've mostly fought before, or are roughly equivalent to enemies you've fought before. However, there are 2 exceptions, and we will go over them at the very end of this subsection. Conversely, in the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, and mobile versions of Dragon Quest, this cave's chests don't ever respawn. However, appropriately, there is much more treasure to be found. Among other things, you can find about 1,000 gold, an iron shield, which is a significant upgrade at this stage in the game, several stat seeds, and also the fighter's ring. Again. So you coming down here and getting everything is always going to be worth it, regardless of which version you're in. The only difference is whether you're going to be coming down here repeatedly or just once. Now, as I alluded to earlier, most of the enemies here are more or less on par with everything you've seen before. Droll drones are basically the equivalent of skeletons, and the lunatic may as well be a cave scorpion. However, there are 2 enemies down here that you have to be aware of. The first is the Drachma. The Drachma is a negligibly tougher Dracolite that also has access to the heal spell. They're not really that threatening, but they can be very frustrating to fight because they can keep patching themselves up. It's recommended that you use the snooze spell to knock them out for a bit. The other enemy that's down here is the one that's actually dangerous. The Ledgerman, or as it's known in the NES version, the Warlock. This upgraded Prestidigitator has the same spell you're familiar with in the form of Sizz. However, he also has Snooze. If he pulls this spell off on you, he's going to get at least 1 free turn to beat you. If you are especially unlucky, he will get several turns to do so. It is usually a very good idea to try to beat him to the punch and then take advantage. However, both the Ledgerman and Drachma have a small amount of sleep resistance. Not much, but small amount. Meaning it won't always work. If you ever see a message, the spell will not work when cast at a player or cast at an enemy, it's because the spell failed a resistance check. Earn up enough cash to get yourself the Iron Axe, if you haven't already gotten it, and try to earn yourself around 1,000 gold so that you can buy the half-plate in Gallenholm. You are also going to want to buy an Iron Shield, assuming that you're playing the NES, Famicom, or MSX version. Keep fighting, and eventually you will be at level 9. At level 9, you'll get yourself Glow, and at level 10, you'll get yourself Fizzle. Fizzle will completely shut down an enemy's ability to cast spells. When we have everything together, it's time to head back to Tantagel Castle, save, heal up, and prepare for our next major adventure. You may optionally want to stock up on herbs and pick up a torch while you're here. We are actually almost at the end of what this guide is going to cover, because you're almost at the part where the training wheels are coming off. We're almost at the point where the game opens up entirely, and where you decide to go and when is going to be entirely based on you. Start by heading your way to Cole. Once there, rest up if needed, and then make your way to the south. Keep heading southward, and eventually you'll see a large swath of swamps with a single cave at the end. That's your objective. Taking steps into the swamp will cause damage, but there's no way to reach this thing otherwise. You're going to have to heal up between it. This environmental damage can kill you, so don't let your HP drop. Welcome to the Quagmire Cave, which is actually a tunnel. Use a torch and make your way southward. You'll notice some branching hallways off to your right. Ignore those for now. There is a door there that requires a key that you don't have yet, and you're going to want to come back later when you're properly equipped. Keep heading southward, and eventually you'll see a staircase going up that you can head up, and you'll wind up in a new area. Welcome to Southeastern Alephgard, which is one of the most important areas in the entire game. The main goal is going to be to the south, but be advised, the enemies down here are roughly on par with the strongest enemies from the Craggy Cave. In addition to running into Ledgermans here, who now are encountered as regular enemies, you'll run into the new Bewerewolf, who is a bruiser of an enemy with high damage and high HP but low defense. You'll also run into the Metal Scorpion, who's tough and slow-moving but has high damage. Head your way southward, and eventually you'll run into some mountains. Your goal is going to be to want to circle around the west side of these mountains, and as you head further southward, you will eventually see a town on a little island. That is your goal. Welcome to Ramaldar, which is likely to be your main place that you're going to be basing your operations for a while. The area immediately outside the town makes an excellent grind spot for this part of the game. The third best purchasable weapon in the game is found here, the steel broadsword, and you should probably get it when cash allows. The absolute most important thing in this town, however, is not something that will be readily apparent when you first arrive. If, from the town's entrance, you circle around to the north, hugging the town's exterior, you'll eventually be able to work your way west, and eventually find an alternate entrance to the back of the town. This, right here, is the single most important shop in this entire game. This, right here, is the only shop in the entire game that will let you buy magic keys where you can get them without spending a magic key first. It's also, by far, the cheapest place to get them, but if you ever wind up running completely out of magic keys, you're gonna have to come back to Ramaldar to get more. And, rather unfortunately, like herbs, you can only have 6 of them. The good news is that one of the sources for magic keys is actually Tentacle Castle. They are significantly more expensive in Tentacle Castle, and you have to spend a magic key in order to get them, but it's significantly more convenient than having to go to Ramaldar. With access to magic keys, and being level 10, the majority of the world is now open to you. You're going to want to head around the different towns, talk to everyone you can, and write stuff down if you need to. All of the game's individual main quest lines are now undertakeable for you. At this point, you have learned basically everything I'm able to teach you, but I am going to give you a few last pieces of advice before we cut out. Once you've gotten your keys, and optionally, once you've farmed up some treasure and experience around Ramaldar, your next goal is going to be Cole again. This time, head west from Cole and follow the coastline. You'll eventually find a little passage you didn't see earlier, and this will lead you to a shrine that will at least give you some guidance onto the plot railroad. If you ever get low on keys, you can head back to Tantagel Castle to restock there, or if you completely run out, you'll have to head back to Ramaldar, unfortunately. One item that you can only access in Brecconary once you have access to keys is Holy Water. It's an item that, when used, keeps all weaker monsters away from you for a short time. The intended use is to make it easier to go through certain areas while you avoid an irritating series of random encounters. However, it's also quite usable for vibe checking yourself against the local monster population. If you wind up using Holy Water and you run into enemies anyway, it's a good sign that the enemies are either above or around the level that you're supposed to be at. Note that it only lasts a short time and won't work inside caves at all. Herbs don't just not cost MP, they heal about twice as much what the heal spell does, so they're better in combat, at least initially. Bear in mind everything I've taught you, and you are indeed prepared for the journey ahead. And you've got about half the game ahead of you at this point.